Let's see
I'm
if
here,
you can
buddy.
hear. Brilliant. Great to have you with us.
You know, if things don't work out for you in this industry, you might as well just go into reading the news. You know, I'm sitting here listening to all of everything that's going on. I mean, it was probably the most exciting news that's going on right now globally, better than TV's news, right?
What time is it? I would like to know. Yeah.
You know, it's 3:08 a.m. and I'm gonna be honest, you know, like I get up this early every day, right? I get up at about 3, but this is talk about an amazing thing to do first thing in the morning, right? Joining my pal over here at in one of the greatest the Nordic region, one of the greatest places in the world, right? So this is truly exciting.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. We are very happy that you could join us and share your views. You were with us recently on Nordic Startup Festival and ran a very interesting masterclass. For everyone out here who missed that, you can find it on Nutty Ventures LinkedIn page. And it's a very interesting and a very unconventional approach to go to market. So Chris explains his process over there. So go check it out. Chris, let's start with you. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, your story, and then we take it on from there.
Awesome. You know, you told me in the green room prior, you know, I can go as deep on this as I want, right? So I'm just gonna be honest on all this. You know, I was very intimidated getting into working in the Nordic region, you know, and the only reason I bring that up is because, you know, on paper, you are so superior in so many things. You do so many things right in the Nordic region. And, you know, to somebody that, you know, comes from my background, you know, you look at it and you study it and you wonder what makes it so successful. So I felt the best approach when I started in this region was to not focus on my successes first, but to tell people about my failures. So, you know, I guess my first big failure was my parents, you know, were both police officers. So naturally, when I was a child, I wanted to be an astronaut and president of the United States. And, you know, obviously I'm sitting with you here today, pal. So I didn't make either of those things happen. But, you know, what I decided was, you know, when I went to space camp, they told me that, you know, my proportions are challenging to become an astronaut. I think that what they were saying was I was a bit overweight. So I really focused in on politics. And, you know, I got involved officially in politics when I was like 12 years old. My uncle was a lobbyist in the Republican Party and did a lot of great work in that space. By the time I was 16, actually 15, but I told him I was 16. I started working in my first congressional campaign. I had to say I was 16 because I was driving for some of the parts of the campaign. And, you know, like who's going to be bold enough to lie to a US congressman about their age? Well, I was that guy. By the time I was 18, I worked on Elizabeth Dole when she ran for United States president. You know, she was president of the American Red Cross. She was Secretary of Transportation. She was Secretary of Labor for the United States. And it was such an interesting campaign to really experience. I mean, I met like 20 of the biggest presidential candidates at that point, you know, all before I was technically old enough to vote. And, you know, when it didn't pan out there, you know, we heard about this interesting guy down in Texas, you know, who had some interesting ideas on how to run a country. That was George W. Bush. So I went over to that campaign when I was around 19 years old. And, you know, when you work in Republican Party politics from such like a young age, you get this jaded perception of reality. And boy, let me tell you, you know, ironically, I had failed campaigns and elections class in college because I missed so much class traveling on the United States presidential campaign. So the irony of how the real world and the kind of academic world collided there in my life, you know, I think it was what kind of unleashed this interesting approach I've taken to everything. Well, politics was great. You know, basically every political campaign I was involved with back then, everybody in America is mad about now. So it's perhaps the world for that matter. And, you know, so ironically, what stopped me from working in campaigns was my mother, unfortunately, got cancer. Now, my mom had spent 35 years in law enforcement. Both my parents did, as I mentioned earlier, you know, and I come from a Sicilian family. So, you know, the whole thing here is I was going to go home, get off the campaign trail, and I was going to help my mom. And, you know, I had some dental work done and I had kept the medicine from it and kept one of the prescriptions. And, you know, when you make these excuses, you get down on your luck. You know, I had this fast paced 24-hour-a-day life cycle from politics. I was a fixer in the political arena. And there was literally nothing I could fix with my mom. I mean, she was, she was very sick. And ultimately, I used that prescription and graduated from Vicodin to then taking Oxycontin. When Oxycontin hit the streets here in America, I never had a prescription for it, but it was so easy to get on the streets. And I graduated from Oxycontin to heroin. And here it is. I'm in my mother's basement after working and traveling with the presidential campaigns and all this. And I'm a full-blown opiate addict. My mother, 35 years in law enforcement, dying of cancer upstairs. And unfortunately, the only thing that stopped this from happening was my mother passed away. And, it was a very interesting part of my life. I actually don't remember a lot of that period of time. During that period of time that she was sick, before she died, I was even elected to public office. And I swear to you, I did not remember getting elected. That was my first election to actual political office, and I did not remember. So rest assured, I was not a very good public official at that point. But in this situation, 2 days after my mother's funeral, the day after my mother's funeral, I was arrested for what would have been considered petty theft. I had taken a coin purse at this funeral. It was on the ground by the coat rack, and inside of it was some cash, some credit cards, some IDs. It was one of the employees of the funeral home. And, my philosophy was that I was going to just bring this back to the funeral home, the day after the funeral, kind of throw it behind the counter, and no harm, no foul. Well, unfortunately, they filed an insurance claim, a police report. And the day after the funeral, realized this funeral had hundreds and hundreds of law enforcement officials from all over the country that there. My mom was a pioneer in law enforcement. She worked for equal rights for women. She worked on Martin Luther King's assassination. She did some very interesting things in her career. And her junkie son is over here stealing things at this funeral home. And the day after the funeral, I'm sitting there, we're doing the final planning and everything to, pay the bill. And these detectives who I remember talking to the night before at my mom's funeral, they came in and they said, we have a warrant for your arrest. Now, when you're a drug addict, you do a series of petty crimes to just kind of get by, right? And so I had no idea what this was for, to be quite honest. And I certainly didn't expect it to be this coin purse thing. And ultimately, they put a $250,000 warrant out for what would normally be, you pay a couple $100s and you get out of jail. That was not going to be the case for me. A $250,000 bail was so astronomically high, but you see, the person who put that on there was the first political campaign that I ever volunteered for. It was a guy who was running for judge, and he was a dear friend of my mom, and he saved my life by doing this. He knew that I would have got the kind of cash that comes in the envelopes from the funeral, and I possibly would have overdosed and died, and he saved my life. But you see, I was not prepared to spend the next 119 days in jail with a lot of people that had been arrested by my parents one time or another. And so it wasn't a very, very good time. And this article came out the second or third day I was in jail. It was a front page article talking about my mom, and inside of it, it was, a pioneer in law enforcement died. Inside, son arrested at funeral home. So, in the criminal world, there are certain things that, like, yay, that's cool. You're a cool criminal. This was not a cool criminal thing, right? Like, I mean, to see a whole bunch of criminals get upset with another criminal for doing crime is a rare thing that I was not prepared to experience. But the worst thing that I don't really talk about often is, at that time I was campaign manager for a sheriff's race, the head of law enforcement for the county. And as I'm arrested, I walk into jail right past the candidate that I managed to campaign, because he's a deputy sheriff in there. And can you imagine, you're running for sheriff and you see your campaign manager coming in cuffs? And, that was a pretty bad experience, I'm sure, for him. He did me a solid when I was in jail, brought me out of the maximum security. My bail was so high, they put me in maximum security. And that's where you have like a lot of white supremacists and things like this. And so I got to experience life from a different perspective. And what I realized is, spending my whole life in politics and all this, you really couldn't get away with anything in politics. Jail, that's a lot like business on the inside. And what I realized is that there were some very smart business minds. Some people may have been corner drug dealers or perhaps some white collar crime, but with the right room, the right audience, the right training, they'd probably be the best stockbrokers, the best business owners. So I really got to look at things from this different perspective. So when I was in jail, the entirety of my life was literally thrown away into dumpsters. My mom's house was foreclosed upon, and I came out of there homeless. I was court ordered to live in a recovery home, and in county several 100 miles away from my childhood area so I've never been there before. So I moved into this town, and it was impossible to get a job, right? But you're required to get a job when you're on government probation. And so they ironically, they wouldn't let me get involved in Republican Party politics. They said it would be a trigger for me. So I wasn't able to do what I knew, but they would let me be a bartender. So in drug recovery and alcohol recovery, I could be a bartender, but I couldn't do Republican Party politics. But I found a loophole: Democrat Party politics, right? So when I was a Republican Party leader, I wasn't necessarily like the strongest conservative leader. I was just good at politics, right? But the Republicans are like, no, there's no way. So even if I wanted to, but the Democrats are like, this might be the next Bill Clinton. We're going to try to see what we can do here. So I moved all the way up in Democrat politics. And I realized that if I was going to do anything, I needed to figure out how to scale politics into the real world. We'll call that the not real world. So, I thought about those times in jail, and I said, how can, I need to be my first client, right? I've got everything against me. But there was all these other people that I've met in the recovery world that had amazing startup ideas and small business ideas. And I'm like, how can I help them? So I was going to create this public relations firm and marketing firm that really focused on people with these scarlet letters. And we created this firm. I started in my recovery home as the first one. I started it with a girlfriend at the time. And, we amassed about 8 clients. It was a big deal for us. And we broke up. So we always have a tragedy when you have a relationship end, but how do you handle this prolifically large 8 client company? Well, I kept one client, she had 7, and I grew that one client over the course of the next 3 years to the fastest growing communication strategy firm in the country. We had clients all over the world, celebrities. We represented most of the media personalities in Chicago, large organizations, big companies, parking garages, weird things. And through this process, what was happening was we were becoming very successful at what we were doing. But the more and more that we progressed, we were being hired to basically make people look better. It was getting away from the original thing. I wanted to help people, kind of eliminate obstacles and barriers, right? And that was something that, I wasn't right with, but I let it go. And one day I got a call from back home. My best friend, my entire childhood life, who I did drug addiction with, they found him dead of a heroin overdose. And I did everything I possibly could to prevent this, right? I offered him jobs. I offered to move him into Chicago. At the time, I'm president of the associate board of the largest organization that deals with drug and alcohol recovery in Chicago. And I couldn't stop this. And, I didn't know how to handle this, but I think I perhaps handled it in a kind of a weird way. I was going to be on television the next day in Chicago on the network television. And I think I was doing analysts on, I was talking about some initiative that we were doing. And I took the time to more or less announce that I'm no longer taking clients. I'm no longer doing client stuff. And that we're going to move to the most, impoverished neighborhood in Chicago and do things for free. Everything that we used to charge for, we were just going to do for free. Because you see, if I couldn't stop my friend from dying, perhaps I could stop people from starting. So that neighborhood that we moved to was the neighborhood that Josh and I, my friend, would drive to get heroin. And, at the time it was the 16th most dangerous neighborhood in America. And we stuck out like a sore thumb. We moved into a storefront that was, I think, a doctor's office, and we flipped it. And we set off to the races. And the things that we did over the next couple of years to make impact are just dramatic. We created collaborations and initiatives that changed lives all throughout. We helped install neighborhood farms in urban areas of Chicago that you can never plant in the ground. We saved people from being kicked out of mental health facilities. We've done all these amazing initiatives. And, at the end of the day, I went on speaking tour. A lot of exciting things were happening, but, it wasn't necessarily fulfilling. And, so I started teaching. And I started teaching startups, new business creation, and I came up with a lot of interesting ways to scale politics into understandable ways. And what I perhaps didn't realize is that I've been doing go-to-market, and humans were just simply the products that we were launching the entire time. You see, political campaigns are a lot like marketing and go to market, you just replace a couple words and it's the same thing. So over the next couple of years, we grew in that perspective. And, I had got, ironically, the probation department, who was in charge of me when I was released to the custody of the state, became my client 10 years later. And it was a device that I was creating to filter water for a new rehabilitation center in the county that the cannabis industry, of all people, I had these things where people would come over to my office and see all these eccentric projects we were working on. We had robots, we were growing corn in the basement in the urban areas of Chicago, things that were like ahead of their time. And we had at one point, somebody that was in the cannabis industry in Nevada came and they saw this way we were filtering water. Now, ironically, in Chicago, they prohibit you from using rainwater to actually be repurposed for drinking, no matter if you filter it or anything. So I moved to Michigan for a year because I wanted to create this water filter because we were working with the domestically battered women's shelter. And, we were doing some amazing things for them, but they kept getting their doors shut, right? Like, I'm like, what is the deal? We'd go there and it'd be locked up, and it was very weird. Well, when people are grant funded, the money can't necessarily just be spent to run the operations of the organization. The money has to go for the programs. So organizations would get funding, they'd have amazing programs, but they perhaps couldn't pay their utility bill and have to shut down. It made no sense to me. So my philosophy was, if we installed gardens and farms in the backyards of these domestically battered women's shelters, and we helped teach them how to grow vegetables, and we put solar and we collected rainwater and made it as self-sufficient as possible, those doors would never shut. Well, of course, big government, which I helped create, getting people elected to office, ultimately, said, no, you can't do that. So we went to Michigan, we developed this device, and ultimately we piloted it in commercial laundromats, and it was able to recycle up to 85% of the water. And the cannabis industry thought this was interesting. I moved out to Nevada, developed this even more, got hemp licenses, moved all the way up into this interesting cannabis industry. I've always been attracted to things that have public relations problems, and cannabis industry has a public relations problem. I became an executive in the largest magazine, and I started mentoring in Founder Institute at their cannabis vertical in San Francisco. Was the first place I mentored in. And, I didn't have any passion more for cannabis than I did for anything else I did in my life, but I definitely knew how to help people eliminate obstacles and barriers because I certainly created enough of them in my life. So long story short, here we are today. So I hope that was an interesting enough background story.
That was really interesting. And I think with the audience as well, I think in the event description, we talked about that. We'll talk about some unorthodox approaches to go-to-marketing, see how political marketing can be brought into the center, and see what we can learn. So I'm very interested in knowing, through various hats that you're wearing. Let's take a couple of minutes on each of these areas. Like, what do you do at Founder Institute? Let's start there. Then we go to your organization, Responsible Solutions, and then into other areas. So Founder
Awesome.
Institute, if you would want to continue. What do you do
Founder
today?
Institute, I love what the work that Founder Institute does. And I'm honored to be one of the global entrepreneurs in residence. I started as a mentor in San Francisco, moved to Silicon Valley, kind of moved through that process, started my own accelerator program with them. And, with that experience, I've been able to mentor on 6 continents with some of the most prolific ideas. And, Founder Institute is something that's generally structured at a local level. And, so global mentorship was not really a thing until the pandemic came. And I didn't know anything other than that. So like I pushed to, and ironically, somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn one day from Abuja, Nigeria. And they're like, hey, can I do office hours with you? I see that you're a Founder Institute mentor. And I didn't know that that's not how it worked. So I went into the program, and just getting involved in Abuja, I experienced something that I never experienced before in my life. And Founder Institute showed me how startup ecosystems are different, and now involved in 6 countries in Africa alone, and pretty much programs, I think 20 countries. And my business partner at Responsible Solutions, Russell, is one of the leaders of the Silicon Valley program for Founder Institute. And, Responsible Solutions, I'm the managing director with Russell. He started this company back in the early 90s, right? He was one of the first people to be able to even register domains. That's how we have responsible.com. Like, he's old school Silicon Valley. And through this process, I actually wanted to meet with Russell. This was a while back, and I wanted to meet with him because, I knew he had this nonprofit he was working on, and I wanted to volunteer to help with it. And I jumped on the phone with him, and it was about 10 minutes into it when I realized, my goodness, this person's mentoring me. And, I never really had a mentor in my life, right? I'd never been able to identify one, at least. And, I'm honored to say that my business partner is my mentor, right? And that's an amazing thing to be able to work with somebody every day that has made such a dramatic impact in American technology scene and all of this. And, we advise companies in a formal capacity, around 200 companies that we work with around the world. And we really focus on unique ways to go to market and unique ways to solve problems. And we take a very global approach to advising. So we build advisory teams for a lot of startups where it has people from all over the world that are not only subject matter experts. I don't really like the word expert. I think it's subjective as it gets, right? But, people that really understand. And what I've realized is just because somebody's had a lot of successes on their resume, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, right? All of my real success came from reacting to my failures. So, I like to work with people that have experienced things like that. And, because of this unorthodox approach I've taken, through the years, I was so honored and to be named in 2021 one of the Institute for Real Growth's IRG 100, which is a cohort of the top 100 CMOs and change agents in the world. Now, talk about imposter syndrome, right? I'm Chris Foltz from Rockford, Illinois, originally, right? And here I am chosen for this room, where the other CMOs are like the CMOs of Facebook, and I mean, like Unilever, McDonald's. And at the time, I'm vice president of global reach for a cannabis magazine, right? So talk about 1,000 times removed from everyone in that room. These are multi-billion-dollar global corporations. And I remember I didn't believe them. Like I didn't apply or anything. I got a call one day, and I just did not believe them, right? So they put me on the phone with the director of this, and I'm talking to him, and I'm just like, I'm literally unselling myself to them, right? I'm just like, I don't understand. And he's like, Chris, we thought about this, and what we were looking for, what we think matters the most is having unique perspectives, right? And that changed my life. Just hearing that this person was the CMO for WPP, the largest advertising marketing company in the world. They own all the other ones, right? And it was the most humbling experience of my life. And I'll never really understand that, because the old me, the Republican Party politics, to me, that would have been the biggest ego causing experience in my life. So, and what I've learned in that room, though, spending 7 months in this cohort, focused on what we call humanized growth. It's the idea of not just focusing, matter of fact, not focusing on short-term shareholder gain, but long-term stakeholder value growth. Part of the other people that were in there, the director of the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN. So a lot of that was something that we worked on for 7 months in these groups. And what I realized is all the language that's used in that room, right? Everything, when you have companies that are $300 million a year and up, right? There's a different set, like ESG is talked about a different way. Sustainable development goals are talked about a different way. And what I can tell you is that, like, I never heard any of those things in my life, right? And here, it's like a common syntax that they all have, and they all work for each other's companies at one point, and they have half of them have PhDs. They just don't go by doctor because they're normal people too. And so here, and then I get involved at the same time in the startup world. Now that's almost divergent, right? And in the startup world, none of the same words were used, right? Like, so how people described SDGs and all this was just entirely different. I didn't know what an AMA was until like 2 months into being a mentor. I'm not afraid to admit the AMA, ask me anything. I'm thinking this is some sort of thing with the American Medical Association that's going on. Like, why is Founder Institute do all these weekly American Medical Association meetings? So it's like that. To be able to be in these rooms with people that are smarter than you is a gift. right? And so that's really kind of fueled my passion. And IRG is an amazing thing. We are all invited to Cannes, the Festival of Creativity in France each year, where they celebrate this interesting group. There's only been 300 people ever named to this list. 400. They just had the latest go through, and it's a lifetime thing. And I cherish the relationships I have from IRG. But more importantly, I believe that these large corporations are amazing. Obviously, they change the world every day. But what I realized in this, it's harder for them to innovate. It doesn't matter how
Yeah.
innovative the company is, but to innovate, they can't do it. They commercialize, they can scale, but startups where the innovation is, and so that's what's exciting about having these two perspectives.
No, but Chris, thank you so much. Again, a very deep dive into this, and you mentioned some very, very interesting points. I was just trying to take some quick notes for our community here. And I think you made an excellent point, because in startups, team, if you're an early stage startup or even a late stage startup, team is the main thing. When you're going to investors, they're always looking at the team, and then you brought out a very different perspective. I've not heard it before. So like partner as mentor. So that's beautiful. So I think that should be one thing that we could strive for in startups. Can I have a startup where we can kind of learn something from each other? That would be awesome. That relationship can never go away. So I think that's very interesting. You also talked about the global advice, having a global perspective, because you might be conceiving something in some part of Sweden. Like when I came to Sweden, I came to a very small town called Växjö. So you might be conceiving something in Växjö, which has a market in Stockholm or maybe in Delhi, in India. I don't know. So having a global focus, I think that's a great point that you made. And you also talked about something which we really don't not follow, because entrepreneurs usually think they have the best idea, so I need to be the best one in the room. Okay, so we never think, no, it's actually better to be in a room where other people are smarter than you, because you can actually take 2 steps forward rather than take 2 steps backward. So great points, Chris. Let's go deeper into go to market. We thank you so much for the perspective on you have on the various hats that you're wearing. What are some of the lessons that we can borrow from your political experience into the startup world? Let's go there as a starting point.
Politics is a very interesting thing. So a political campaign is almost like being in a 24-hour day accelerator, right? And the election is like launching your startup. And with this, political campaigns are dominated by relationships, right? So I came up with this thing I call core strategy: concepts, offers, relationships, and exposure. Now, these were things that I learned in politics, where, a concept, that's like the campaign, that's the candidate, that's more or less the heart and soul, but it's not just the idea, it's building the kind of ecosystem around it. Now your offers, that's your platform. This is why I'm running. This is what I'm offering to America, to Sweden when I get elected, right? And with that, you have all the kind of sub offers like, hey, listen, fundraising, this, that, and the other. But you see, if you don't have a solid concept in mind, all of your offers are going to be going in all different directions, and they're not going to support it. And relationships, in politics, whenever there's a political fundraising event, they create these host committees. And it's really just a way for the top donors to have their ego stroked, to have their name high up on the list next to President Barack Obama's name, for instance. And, with this interesting dynamic, it was amazing to see what the drivers were for people. In campaigns, there's limits on how much you can donate, right? So when somebody is unable to donate because they're already at their limit, does it change the dynamic? How much does money play a role? But how much do relationships matter when money is not something that could be exchanged anymore? So with that, and we started thinking about those host committees as like the brand ambassadors, or in my case, I like to take competitors and make them allies and then go to market, which is peculiar, people think, but it's always worked in my advantage. And once you have those relationships in line and it makes sense with your offers, It's the E, it's exposure. And exposure's everything from the awareness campaigns, the PR, the marketing. And oftentimes people, I like to put leaders into buckets: creators, fixers, and doers. And in none of those brands of leadership categories that I have, none of them are better than the next. It's a balanced scenario when you have all three in an organization. And what I found is that people do core in different order. Creators love to do exposure first, like immediately start talking about this stuff to the world. But then what they don't realize is you're kind of polarized into a corner. Now in politics, the moment that you do that, like you can say something wrong, back yourself in a corner at 8 a.m. and your political career is over by 5 p.m. for the rest of your life, because that can destroy it. In the startup world, the margin of error is actually a lot less than politics. But I've always thought in everything that I worked, I operate under this sense of urgency and this margin of error that came from politics, right? So if people, instead of getting concerned about words, go to market, just like AMA, it took me a while before I realized what GTM meant. Even though I say go to market, sometimes you just don't see these acronyms and everything. But the reason why I bring that up is because just because you think of something a certain way doesn't mean that's the way that it is. Doesn't mean that's the way that your audience is going to think about it. And if instead of being scared of, oh, my go-to-market strategy, this, that, and the other, just think of your startup as a political campaign, right? You have something that you want to get elected, it is your business, and structure it backwards from there. And I've built my entire career based on this, mainly because I haven't taken traditional marketing and public relations classes. Anything that I've ever won an award in, I've never taken a class in, so everything is from politics in my life.
That's a lot of material, Chris. I'm trying to take some of these words and put these for our startups out here. GTM, Swerker GTM will be go to market.
Go to market. Yeah.
Yeah.
GTA, I at least know is, that I think it might be a video game.
Yeah.
But trust me, I would mess that one up as well, and that's the interesting thing. People, one time somebody asked me, Chris, why do you admit these things, right? Are you afraid people are going to think? No, authenticity is the new disruptive, right? We live in this world where everybody, you brought up a few moments ago, like, oh, I have the greatest idea. I'm so much different than the next person. We all spend so much time trying to like demonstrate how we're different than everyone else, that if we just took a moment, right, and thought about what makes us all the same, realize that is the secret sauce. So you see, when you're going to market, when you're doing customer discovery and all this stuff, if you focus on just the differences, you're never going to find the people that are going to be your early adopters. Those people have something in common with you. There's something the same. You have a similar problem. You're looking for a similar solution, right? So if we take a moment to just step back and stop bragging about all the things we've done, then we have a moment to actually, it's much easier to actually do good things than it is to make it look like you do good things, right? And I think, that's why I left PR and famously went on speaking tour with the subject of social impact is the new public relations, because I truly think of it that way. And if you take a moment to think of how your go-to-market strategy actually benefits people beyond yourself, benefits people beyond your direct customers, benefits people beyond your direct investors, literally, it's not even cool to be the number one in your industry anymore. I mean, I had a 14-year-old client at one point, he may have been 15, that was number one in his industry. What is cool is changing your industry forever, right? Changing the way people think about your industry, changing the way people think about the sector that you're in, and changing the way people think about you as a brand. That's what that's what really matters.
Very interesting point. So I think change being in the center over there. Chris, you talked about, so I'm just putting some of the points. I'm taking these, scribbling some of the points over here. You mentioned something very interesting. You said that in your political career, you developed this order kind of a core, like a concept, offer, relationships, and exposure. And then you very fast brought in another concept. Maybe we couldn't even pick it up properly. It was creators, fixers, and doers, which was leaders. And then you were trying to create a mesh out of it. And then you made a very interesting point over there that startups or entrepreneurs are creators and they want to get exposure direct. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? How should startups approach go to market? Like so that's one thing. And then you mentioned authenticity as well. So let's take the whichever you want to take first.
Yeah, and to be honest, I never really talk about my creator, fixer, doer thing. I don't know why I haven't. It's so core to my life, and really what it is to be a center of influence. You need to have
Hmm.
balanced leadership, right? Everybody talks about influencers and all this stuff. I'm talking about having actual influence here, right? In order to have influence, in order to change things, you need to really understand the type of leader that you are. And creators are the kind of idea people. They're really good at ideas, and doers are somewhat the status quo, but most large
Hmm.
corporations are ran by doers, right? Creators are kind of these progressive thought process, but may not necessarily know all the paths to get there. And I'm a fixer personally. Russell, my business partner, he's a doer, probably like the most archetypal doer. And my better half, my partner of 10 years, she's a creator, literally the archetypal creator. And we created this concept years ago out of something that I would use in politics. And what it is by knowing what your weaknesses are, right? By
Hmm.
knowing as a leader, you realize that those same weaknesses are going to be across your thought processes for go to market, the things that cause you to be in feel like imposter syndrome, feel that maybe you're not good enough, your product's not good enough. We all have these things, right?
Hmm.
I mean, and so that's why by understanding those, it makes it much more powerful for you as a leader. So a lot of the startup now, what you'll notice is this: there's a lot of startups that are started by, like, let's say, a scientist, right?
Hmm.
Awesome
Hmm.
product. You look at their pitch deck and you can tell a scientist put it together, because that's a doer. And, so
Hmm.
they have all the hard stuff figured out, none of the fluff, which is amazing. Right. But if you just take a moment to realize that, and as opposed to penalizing that startup founder for
Hmm. Hmm.
being overwording everything, and realize, well, listen, this person's a scientist. I'm thankful that they don't have all the fluff. They have something real. And that's much more easy to deal with than to create something that looks real. Right. But then you
Hmm.
get to a creator, they'll have the most beautiful deck. Right. I'm telling you, it'll be translated in 15 languages. It'll be in the metaverse, right? Somehow.
Hmm.
But you see, at the end of the day, you get into asking them any questions. First, they're personally offended by anything that you're questioning. And even if it's not meant that way, but then at the end of the day, the likelihood of launch is very low. And it's not because the idea is bad or anything, right? Now, a fixer, somebody like me without something to fix, people think I'm very proactive, right? I'm not proactive. I'm very reactive. I just react to a lot of things that it seems proactive. Um, but famously, I was a speechwriter, and I have a written expression disorder. So how can you be a speechwriter at the same time that you have you have a problem here with written expression? What would happen is I would be so frustrated when I read like a senatorial candidate's announcement that they're running for office, that I would literally redline every sentence. I would rewrite every sentence, because my brain, in reacting to things, was capable of ideation that is much similar to a creator. And so, but if I had to start and write that speech from the beginning, I would be in trouble. So in GTM strategies, as a fixer, I always look to what I can react to, right? What is out there. And sometimes normal startup theory is, there's the black and white. I'm a gray area all day. There's the linear path that you need to take, very focused. Well, I like to take this path right
Hmm.
there. That's easier for me. But if it was just me and we didn't have the Russells of the worlds, we didn't have the Canes of the worlds in the leadership dynamic, it would never work. So all the successes of my life is just because I've been around people that had those leadership qualities better than I had. I was just a fixer that helped put it all together. We did some amazing things with that.
So, okay, bringing it to a real startup case, for example, would you advise that you can create a better startup by having a more balanced leaders, like say people who are a mix of creators versus fixers and doers in the same team? I realized in my first startup in Sweden, because I was the creator, like I was always in the cloud, but I had 7 co-founders in that. Those were all fixers or doers. So the moment I would start presenting something, they'll say, excuse me, take it a level down from clouds. So you are in the cloud level. Can you bring it down over here and make it? I'm just thinking, what's your perspective on that?
I think that the biggest thing, if you can get a company that has all 3 of them working
Hmm,
together, and let's say there was a 3 CEO situation,
hmm,
and you could get them to all get along, and then you would literally change the world with anything.
hmm,
And I think that it's really about finding the strengths and the needs, so I wouldn't put a doer at the CEO level, but then how do you convince somebody that has all this success in their life that maybe they shouldn't be the CEO? So there's a lot of ego management when it comes
hmm,
down to leadership, but it's about taking the time to realize where people find purpose, right? Oftentimes my skill sets and my values and my purpose don't align. I mean, that's partly why I left politics. And, the same thing happens when it comes down to leaders. And, sometimes you just have to be creative about it. I remember one time I ran for political office inside the Republican Party, and I thought I was going to be the only one running for the state chairman. And I get to the convention, and it was at a hotel, and what pulled up was several vans, and they started unloading all this equipment. This is for college Republican state chairman. And that was somebody running against me. They had a multiple hotel rooms. They had a whole campaign suite. They had a fully funded campaign. Now, there was no way I was going to be able to defeat this person because I was appointed. Although I was the vice chairman of the state college Republicans, I was appointed. This person was the chairman of the largest organization in the state. But what I did is I spent that week and came up with a new role that was co-chairman, and ultimately got him and his entire slate to fall into these new roles. And ultimately we went on as a team to have the largest growth of college Republicans in America. We created the first minority outreach program and things that would have never happened if I didn't face that challenge. And the same thing happens in business. Try taking a scientist who created all the technology, innovated this, has a business model, and tell them they shouldn't be CEO, when instead you need to take a moment and tell them, this is what you are going to be better than anyone in the world at, and
hmm.
this is what we need for you. I don't care if you have to create the role. Creators come up with some interesting names for the titles there, so at least doers have something that falls in alignment with normal sensibility. But that's what I'm saying. Take a moment to know each other. Take a moment to actually, there's certainly a difference between being in a leadership role and leading. And I think if you take a moment to think about that when you're a startup founder, think about what you actually did to lead today. What are you doing to lead people? What are you doing to lead industry? Not accumulating leadership titles. At one point, I was a president of, I think, 7 organizations on college campus. Let me tell you, all that did was make me 1/7 as effective, right? But what I learned about doing those things all at the same time was how to deal with so many different types of leaders. And that's probably the most important thing. Team only matters if leadership knows how to cause teamwork.
Okay, that's a deep point. Um, okay, let's go to the startup side once again. You coach a lot of startup founders, and you across 6 continents. You are in different. Uh, how would you say, across 200 organizations that you're going through your responsible company. What are the common challenges that you see when startups are trying to hit the market? Where do they go wrong, or what are some of the common patterns that you have seen which could be good for our community to know?
I think a lot of people undervalue their life experiences, right? Like, so when you're launching a startup, and let's say you're in the fintech world,
Mm,
believe it or not, some experience you could have had as a child or some organizational leadership experience you have is directly pertinent and directly going to help you with this. And that's where grit comes from. You see, we've all overcome obstacles in our lives, right? And it may not, this may be our first startup, and so we may not have faced the challenges that we have in the startup world. But if we take a moment to look at that challenge, to look at that obstacle, and look back in our lives and think about something that was similar to it, And, you know, that was a challenge I had. I never realized that the experience of I always felt inferior, right? I didn't know the words that were used for things, but I had all of these experiences. And until I took my life experiences and applied them, just like I applied politics without fear of judgment, I applied it towards business. You can do that yourself, right? So finding a way to bring out the team members that know how
Mm,
to overcome obstacles and actually creating an environment that allows people to contribute to solving problems is a big deal. Oftentimes in the startup world and business in general, all the problems live in this vacuum, right? In the
mm,
secret back room of leadership, even though it affects not only every team member, it affects every stakeholder, and perhaps it affects the world. But you see, if you would instead open up that door, be
mm.
authentic, come out, ask your team, you know, listen, I've had these tough conversation times. We want me to make payroll down on things like this. And if you simply ask people and be authentic with it, you're going to be blown away with who are those fixers, who are those people who are going to help you solve these challenges.
Okay. So as a startup, do you, if I'm a startup, do you think at what stage should I start talking to my market? Because I'm developing, let's say, a very interesting solution. It could be an app for pets. It could be an app for some HR problem that I'm trying to develop. When do you think the lessons that you have brought out, like authenticity, telling your story, when does that become
Yeah,
important?
it
Should you
it,
wait
it
for the
happens
product?
in the it happens in the pre-idea stage,
Okay.
right? And what I mean by that is you have no business creating a solution unless you truly understand the problem, right?
Hmm.
And you have no business, you know, trying to make money off something when it doesn't matter to you, right? Like the actual product, you know, like that's when I don't like startups that just have pure cash grabs. So many of these things have it, right? They're exploiting some sort of fad, something
Hmm.
that's going to kind of wash by the wayside. You need to be authentic from the very beginning. If you do things for the right reasons, they won't end for the wrong reasons. Most companies fail because they don't understand their customer. They think they do, but they
Hmm.
don't, which means that, you know, don't write surveys for customer discovery that are geared towards giving you the results that make you look good. That's what you don't want that, right? Surround yourself with no people for a week and see how much that changed your life. See how much that changes your trajectory. Russell said no to me on more things than he's ever said yes to. But I tell you this, he's right about every single one of them. And I learned from that, right? So, you know, be willing to realize, you know, people don't like to be sold, right? But they love
Hmm.
to buy. So if people don't like to be sold and they love to buy, well, how does that happen? Well, it happens because you relate to them, right? And when you relate to your audience, well, there's no sale that's needed.
Okay. So you're saying so the startup should be about some deep problem that you have personally related to what you feel that this is something that you want to change. So you need to have
Simon Turner, one of
authenticity
our
at.
colleagues from our African consulting group, he's also the head of FI Ghana. He wrote an amazing article in Medium. It's on our website right now. And it talks about that the startup's likelihood of success are much higher when that startup solves a problem that was
Mm,
personal to that startup founder, right? So before you have an idea to solve something for money, solve something for yourself. And then when you find out that that brings enough value to other people because you
mm.
took a moment to not focus on what makes you different, but focus on what makes you the same, well, then once you realize that they also share the problem, then you understand the value that it is. Then you understand if it should be a business. Spend more time doing customer discovery. Spend
Okay.
1,000 hours doing customer discovery in product validation before you spend 1,000 hours chasing investors.
But that's a very interesting point that you make. Customer discovery, if we can go there, what do you mean by it? And customer validation for our audience, I'm just asking this.
So in politics, we used to poll people, right? And we used to find out exactly, you know, I was on the advanced team, which means I would go to places before the candidate would go, learn everything about the community, tell the candidate when they got off the plane. So when they walked off the plane, they knew that this person's family member just died in Iraq. This person runs the local factory. Having that information, understanding what matters to people, changed what the candidate said. Same thing applies in business, right? So when you're out here trying to determine if you actually have a problem that is large enough to matter, but small enough for you to actually solve, and then determine, does the pain point, like if your product doesn't solve a problem, if your business doesn't solve a problem, trust me, you're moving to the bottom of any pile of decks I'm ever going to review. Not that you can't make money without solving a problem. There's plenty of fad and vanity things that do that. But if you want to change the world, then solve a problem. And you can do that as a for-profit company. You can do that as a nonprofit. You can do it through anything, but you do it for the right reasons, right? So that's why if you take a moment to actually ask people, put people in, listen to your opposition more and more. That's one thing Russell can tell within 5 minutes if a company is going to be successful, because he can tell within 5 minutes if they know their customer.
Okay, great point. But Chris, I'm also realizing here, you are a very authentic speaker. Like what you are saying, it really coming from heart, and one can always relate to that. In building your startup, taking it to market, how important, because it's a lot about how you weave your idea and story and kind of relate to people who you're taking it to. How important is it for the startup founders to be vocal, or to be able to take a stand, to be able to be communicative? Does that mean a person who is not communicative cannot be a founder? Yeah.
I think that's a very good point. You can be a founder and not be communicative, but you have to find somebody that can be, and perhaps that's going to be your co-founder. Like there's certain rules here, and Silicon Valley has interesting rules, right? Like in New York, you show up to meetings 20 minutes late, totally cool. You're wearing suits everywhere. But you see, in Silicon Valley, you can wear like loafers and a polo shirt, but if you're not there 15 minutes early, you're not even getting in the room. So the same rules kind of apply in politics. If I was running for office and I really had nothing to say, it doesn't matter how many degrees I have, doesn't matter how much business success I have, I'm not going to get elected, right? There's a requirement to stand out. There are rules to being different, right? And these rules are very simple, right? You see, if we all focus on, like, for instance, not forgetting where we came from, right? That keeps us humble. It helps us relate to people. I always find a way to relate to people. And during the process, when we face obstacles and everything, we take a moment to make sure we haven't forgot where we're going, right? So once we take a constant reminder of where we came from, we can never lose sight of where we're going. And in that process, I find that the most valuable thing is actually taking time to reflect on everything you do and taking time to react to failures. We live in this world where there's data on everything, right? So if you don't treat your personal data, the feedback you're getting from other people, the opinion from mentors, the opinion from advisors, facial expressions when you're meeting in virtual, you're going to have a hard time standing out, because those are all the cues that your audience are giving to you to actually relate to them. And that's what you need, no matter what the room is. No investor is going to invest in you if they can't relate to you. Okay,
great points. Chris, we have reached the end of the conversation here. And one last point. You have worked across several regions. I'm just very interested in knowing what's your perception of Nordic region, Sweden. So you have worked with founders here. What makes this, yeah.
I love the Nordic region, right? And for so many things, I was, like I said earlier, I was very worried about going in, and I met with Anna Lundbach. She's one of the mentors in the program there, and she basically explained to me this whole notion of how people aren't braggadocious, right? In the Nordic region, and here you have a region that has some of the most prolific scores on innovation, on pretty much everything. You guys spend like 70% of your money on innovation as countries there, but somehow manage to keep your egos in check and not become too Americanized. And what I realized is that if we come in here and we help startups actually talk about the things that deserve the hype, right? And it's not bragging. It's actually being authentic, right? If we help with that, I believe that the Nordic startup region is going to be literally the destination and the most impactful in the world. I think that the startups in the Nordic region are going to make impact in Africa. I think that in India, I think there's a lot of appealing, in America, we like to typecast things. And I think we all think that it's just IKEA and whatever's going on there. I could tell you right now, I've never been more inspired about the future than what I have learned from some of these startups in the Nordic region. So I'm really excited about working with them. And I know I'm very involved in the FI program. I'm speaking at the Vision session this upcoming week, I believe.
Yeah.
And, so with that, 2030s are a big target for everyone. I think now is the time for the Nordic region to shine. From 2025 to 2030, I think it's going to probably be the biggest startup growth region in the world. So,
okay, brilliant. Chris will get you into a more specific masterclass as well in an event we are organizing on 7th of December. So I think Nordic Pitch Battle. So we'll see how this goes, and we'll get you involved, because these are eye-opening, these are breathtaking, these are soul-searching points that you have brought on the table. I've seen marketing. I've spent my life in marketing for Unilever's, Pepsi's, Coca-Cola's, and all. It's so refreshing to hear words from you, authentic, how would you say, experiences that you have shared. I think that's a very different perspective on the plastic world of marketing that we live in, templated in Canva or a very simple grid. If we don't reach marketing at the level that you are talking about, we will not be able to create brands which are more than plastic. So I think, thank you so much for being here today and making a real difference. Thank you for the audience to being here, and have a nice lunch, everyone. Chris, you are close to your breakfast, I think.
I eat 24 hours a day. That's how I'm able to stay awake. So thank you so much. I really appreciate everything. Thanks for attending, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a very, very good day. Bye-bye.